Welcome to The Art of Average, where we look at games that didn't exactly set the world on fire, but had just enough of a spark to be something special. Today, I'm looking at a little game called Defiance. For those who aren't familiar, Defiance was not just a game, but also a TV show that ran on the Sci-Fi Channel for a handful of seasons. The concept was that players in the game would do events and missions, and this would tie into the show. Conversely, the show would have events happen that would impact the game, and the two would have sort of a synergy with a living world shared between viewers and players that each had an impact in. Of course, that is just the concept of what they were going for. In reality, as you might expect, the game needed to have a steady stream of content already created to be dished out as the first season went on. And the first season of the show was, well, already filmed and edited, and kicking off on Sci-Fi Channel about 2 weeks after the game released. This meant that while the concept of synergy between the game and the show is great in concept, what ultimately was provided to players and viewers were vague references to one or the other, and the events in the game or the show happened rigidly and sequentially with itself. You can't have a mission in the game go live with the potential for different outcomes, because if it's going to impact the show, you need it to happen in a way that fits with the show, because it's already been written, directed, and edited. Likewise, since the show was already written, and the teams worked on both were very close connection to each other, the game already knew what the story beats were for the season. So the events and the missions that came out had already been created proactively of the show. And you can't have the game's events alter or push the story too far forward from what the show's providing, because you can't expect that every person is going to be both playing the game and watching the show. So you can't afford to frustrate your show viewers if they start to feel left out of the loop because they aren't playing the game. I could go on, but I think the point has been made. The concept of what they wanted to do is neat, but in practice, it's a logistical nightmare. To boil down Defiance in the most simplistic way I can, it's sort of this mutant hybrid of an MMO and Borderlands. And honestly, it kinda goes hard. Rewind back to 2009, and the first Borderlands has just come out and reinvented the concept of a shooter where you collect loot like Diablo. Prior to this in 2007, Hellgate London tried to make this work, but unfortunately just couldn't capture an audience, and the studio filed for bankruptcy in 2008, 1 year later. However, Borderlands had the sauce, and thus the looter-shooter genre was born. Fast forward to 2012, and Borderlands 2 was released, proving to be a smash hit and just about doubling the sales of the first. The time of looter shooters was booming, and by 2014, the first Destiny was released, and in 2016, The Division would take a crack at the genre, each proving successful in their own ways. However, while these games found long-term success, pulling and tweaking the formula that Borderlands had popularized, neither was really an MMO in the traditional sense. You grouped up with up to 4 players, maybe saw some other players in the hub, but there was not a shared world where double-digit numbers of players could all engage in content seamlessly together. This is the pivot that Defiance made that defines its spark. Yes, you're out shooting enemies, gathering loot, getting stronger, putting points into skills, all the things that Borderlands allowed you to do, and did better, moment to moment, honestly. But what I could not do in Borderlands was open up my map, see a huge event spanning an entire zone taking place, hop into my Dodge Challenger, and ride over to that event and join dozens and dozens of other players without skipping a beat. Now, I'm in the chaos with all these other players firing rockets, giving and gaining buffs, reviving each other, focusing fire on the most bullet sponge enemies you've ever seen, and just having a great time doing it. Big map events like this weren't very common back in 2013. 1 year prior to Defiance's release was Guild Wars 2, which sort of carved its own unique path in the MMO space, with its emphasis on group events of both the smaller and zone-wide variety, and allowing any player around to simply run up and start contributing. As much fun as Defiance, the game, was, however, it was still only one side of the coin. In 2015, 2 years after the show and game had released, Sci-Fi Channel announced that it would have its third and final season. The good news for players was that the game would continue to be supported by the developers, Tryon World. Where this gets messy, however, is that a new version of the game, called Defiance 2050, was released in 2018. This was overall the same game, but with different weapons and skills. But even weirder is that it did not replace the original Defiance. Instead, it was a separate game that sort of coexisted alongside the original Defiance. That is, up until 2021, when Game-Ago, now the developers working on both Defiance games at this point, announced that the servers would be shutting down on April 29th, 2021. But just recently, now 4 years after those servers went down, a studio by the name Fox Games was given the licensing to both Defiance and Defiance 2050, and the servers for the original 2013 Defiance were brought back online, with some controversial DLC removed that apparently added weapons the community was not fond of. It's through this revival of the game that I've been able to re-experience Defiance again, almost a decade after I'd stopped playing it back in the day. Through modern eyes, this game feels straightforward and simple, in a good way. It's not interested in being the only game you ever play in your life, with predatory monetization or daily and weekly challenges to complete so that they can inflate their engagement numbers. It's just a fun game, brought back to life by developers that seem to genuinely love it, and being populated with players that seem to really enjoy playing it. I think what surprised me the most, going back to Defiance after so many years away, is how the shooting holds up surprisingly well. Mechanically, yes, it's simple. You can roll and crouch, aim down sights, sprint, and you carry 2 weapons at the same time. You have what they call your ego power, which is one of 4 abilities that you can select at the start of the game. Blur lets your character move way faster, and your melee attacks will deal their full damage against enemies with shields. Cloak lets you go invisible and immediately triggers a shield recharge. Decoy throws out a clone of yourself that enemies will focus on, and then you can swap places with your clone as well. Overcharge, it's the skill I chose, instantly reloads your weapon and buffs up all weapon damage for a brief amount of time. I do think this is the one that most players go with, but I may be wrong there. What's interesting about these skills is that they don't exist on segregated skill trees. Instead, they exist within one skill matrix, And then you put points into passive effects that expand outwards from where your chosen skill sits in that matrix. It's a fun system, though not very deep, but it's simple enough to get the job done, and the passive effects are interesting enough to be fun to think about when making choices of where to put your points in. For instance, one particularly fun passive skill allows my car to explode for more damage if I ram it into something. Pretty fun for some events where you need to deal damage to a center crystal, and your opening move is driving full speed into it for pretty good damage, like you're some kind of crash test dummy. You can also carry a supply of grenades, of which there's a few different types to experiment with. Then you have what the game calls spikes and stims. The stims are generally just quick use ways to restore health, shields, or armor, but the spikes are where some really fun multiplayer interactions I felt actually happen. A spike is essentially a small area of effect buff that gets placed at your character's feet when activated. The effect is active for as long as you stand in the area where the spike was placed. There's not many different effects that the spike can have, and it's generally either an increase to damage or regenerating ammo as long as you stand in the area. But while there's not a lot of variety in these spikes, so much of the game comes down to positioning, and this is what makes them really fun to see players using. Say you need to defend a specific location on a map, and there's enemies swarming in from all sides. You might see a few different players dropping down various spikes for these buffs, and it leads to players working together to keep each other while stocked on ammo and the damage numbers kept up. It elicits that feeling of getting buffed in World of Warcraft and seeing the numbers reflected. It just feels good to see player actions have positive consequences on the flow of combat, and Defiance understands this concept and tries, however slightly, to provide that kind of response. Fox Games have said they're interested in developing some new things for the game, depending on how player feedback is looking and making sure server stability is all good, which right now I do have the pretty common disconnect. But if there's one thing I would love to see expanded upon, it would be the spike system. Let us drop spikes that increase reload speed, or recharge our shields faster while standing in it. Let players bring these tools to challenging content and let them find strategies and synergies that work well together. When it comes to the act of shooting, it also feels surprisingly solid. Headshots and critical hits produce a really satisfying, almost Call of Duty style sound effect that lets you know your hits are landing and doing more damage. Reloading can be done while sprinting, which is a nice touch with how much sprinting you'll be doing around in a fight. The roll dodge is great for getting out of area of effect attacks that you can usually see telegraphed. Not always, though. The loot itself is dished out way less than Borderlands, so you're not going to see enemies spewing out drops like piñatas. But higher tier enemies, finishing an event, completing missions, they all drop a steady stream of rewards. And these rewards are almost always scaled to your level, so any drop you see is usually an upgrade in some way, which keeps the leveling experience feeling like a smooth ramp up over time. Speaking of that loot, I was impressed with the variety of weapons that the game actually has. To list most of them off, we have assault rifles, bolt-action, semi-auto, and or charging sniper rifles, regular and charging style pistols, a charge, pump, combat, and sawed-off style shotgun, submachine guns, light machine guns, and more unique weapons like the biomagnetic gun category that can deal slight damage to enemies, but it has alternate capabilities that can buff or heal allies. There's also this injector gun that spawns friendly mobs that attack other enemies depending on how much you shot them with it before they died. Pretty cool. Then, almost all of these weapons have the ability to add mods. Mods come in the same level of rarity as weapons and shields, and they add slight bonuses like increased damage, range, reload speed, etc. They won't exactly bring a weak gun up to a super powerful one, but I can imagine as you approach endgame, it is fun to tinker with these mods and squeeze a little more juice out of a weapon. To quote Todd Howard,
"All of this just works."
Nothing flashy, but it feels good. The weapon variety is honestly more than I expected, and there's a level of customization you have control over that won't win any rewards or anything, but it allows you to make some choices on how you want to improve your equipment. Loot drops pretty regularly, and if a looting game is measured in quality by how good it feels to get a rare drop, I think Defiance succeeds here pretty well. Defiance is fun. Plain and simple. It wasn't a game that was going to win Game of the Year awards or anything, and there's a lot here that I did not talk about that the game could do better. The story is uninteresting, and told in an uninteresting way. The missions and events can get repetitive, and while there is actually a decent amount of enemy variety, you do start to see how most of them involve either shooting you from a distance or running up to smack you. But this video isn't about things that I don't like about games. It's about the things I think games that have real flaws do well, and what makes them special. And Defiance is a pretty special game. It busted down the doors on a genre that still remains unexplored today. An MMO and a looter shooter trying to share the best parts of both, with big events that lets players come together and just cause some chaos. It's definitely an average game, in the most technical sense. But that doesn't stop this game from being just a ton of fun. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.
Don't do it. You will die. I promise. Goddamn raiders. Always do the opposite you tell them.